Ah, bonjour, Mr. Bob.
Bonjour.
Comment ça va?
Bonjour. Ça va bien?
Ah,
Et tu?
très bien.
Très bien, n'est-ce pas?
Merci.
Oh, aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas?
Merci.
Merci beaucoup. So, day 17, 116 nautical miles covered in the last 24, which for us is almost the best of the trip. Not quite the best of the trip, but not far off. And we're due to arrive tomorrow, which is Sunday. Today being Saturday. Huzzah! Huzzah! At last, we're arriving in Cherbourg. At least we should be arriving in Cherbourg tomorrow. Right at the moment, we're stemming the tide to some degree. We've got the tide on the bow holding us up. But a little bit later on, it will turn and it will shoot us past the Channel Islands and towards Cherbourg. And we anticipate arriving there the early hours tomorrow morning, maybe 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something like that. And I'm very pleased we will be. We've been coming up the western approaches to the English Channel, a notorious piece of sea, and you can get extremely big waves there and very rough weather. It's reasonably kind to us. It's been very stormy here the last week, in fact exceptionally stormy, but we've been enduring bad weather offshore, and to be honest, we're better off experiencing bad weather in the middle of the ocean than we would have been in these essentially coastal waters, because the seas stand up very steep here. And I know that through experience, and can be very, very uncomfortable for a small boat, and actually quite dangerous for a small boat. So we've been negotiating the Ushant separation scheme. So the ships, they come down the channel from that direction, headed that way, and they're going to go round the corner of France and off to Spain and to the Americas and whatever. And they separate, the ones coming north and ones coming south, by a separation scheme just off Ushant, I think is the way you pronounce it. It's the northwestern tip of France. Just around the corner is the city of Brest. And legally, when you come across those schemes, you're meant to take them at right angles, and that's a right angle course. You're not trying to make a right angle, you just put your bow at right angles to whatever is, and you keep on going. You'll probably be blown a little bit sideways or taken a little bit sideways, but that's the law. And it is monitored by the French and pretty diligently enforced, and boats very often are intercepted that have transgressed the scheme, and they will be fined. So we actually came a little way past it, but of course you get the ships streaming down from up channel, headed for the separation scheme entry thing, southbound, and then the ones coming out of that heading up the channel or doing a hard left and heading up the Irish Sea. So we came a little bit beyond the separation scheme and then took our course a distinct bound south so that we could come to the southern side of where all those ships are. And as we speak at the moment, there are probably about 20 ships out on the distant horizon, one way and another, either headed away or headed towards that separation scheme. There is another scheme ahead of us, and it's off a place called Cap de la Hague, which is on the Cherbourg Peninsula, the northwestern point of the Cherbourg Peninsula in France, and it's basically just north of the Channel Islands. And so by coming this side of all that stream and flow, we are now in what is known as the inner ship channel. So it's ships that don't have to take that big channel, in other words smaller boats, fishing boats, etc. They'll use this inside channel. This isn't a small channel, this is a channel that's several miles wide, so there's actually plenty of sea room. It all sounds a bit more alarming than it really is, but if you're coming this way, it's worth being aware of it. So there's the scheme at Ushant, there's the scheme at Cap de la Hague, and there used to be a scheme off Land's End as well, so if you're headed over to the UK side, you need to be aware of that. I have the feeling that the scheme has been discontinued, but I don't know that for certain. You need to check your charts, you need to check your notices to mariners and all of that stuff, and be aware that there is a scheme on the other side of the channel around Land's End and the Lizard, that area. So what else have we had? Well, we've been negotiating in amongst all the big boats, quite a few fishing boats, a lot of French fishing boats off here by their names, and we see them, and you see their top marks in the dark. They're either green for, if I recall correctly, green for trawling, which is scraping the bed of the sea, or red for fishing, which means they're fishing mid-water or top-water nets. Whatever, the bottom line is power normally gives way to sail, but in that instance sail has to give way to the fishing boats if they have their fishing lights on. So again, something to be aware of, and those guys are all over the place. We've seen, as I said, we've seen quite a few of them, and in fact there's a little group of 4 of them just to the north of us that we passed earlier during the night, and they're actually fishing generally up in this direction. You can actually see them. I personally think they're probably part of the same fleet, probably the same company. So fishing boats, well, the reason we're able to see their names, etc., is because we have this AIS system on board, and I have to say that if you was to make one big recommendation in terms of safety for particularly for short-handed sailing, it's to have one of those things on board. It's enabled us to identify a whole bunch of boats that we didn't even know were out there. Most of those boats don't come anywhere near to us, any distance where they're concerned, but nevertheless it's nice to know that they're there. Great little system we have. Only cost probably not even $150, and we can see all these boats within about a 30-mile radius that are carrying one of those transmitters. So very, very useful. We sailed all the way to this point. Only really occurred to us yesterday, I think it was, or the day before yesterday, and Nikki mentioned it. She said, "You realise we sailed the whole distance?" So it's true, we have been running the engine, but we've only run it for power. And we don't run it at all. We haven't run it at all to make progress, apart from leaving port at the other end and presumably arriving port at this end, unless we get completely stopped by the tide off Cap de la Hague, in which case we probably would fire up the engine to help us on our way a bit. It may well be that we've sailed the entire what has been about 1,450 miles or whatever it is, 1,500 miles maybe, from the Azores to here. So she's a sailing boat. Amazingly. So I guess the biggest, one of the biggest concerns we've had, and we mentioned it on the vlog yesterday, was the weather. And the reason that it has been such a concern for us, weather is always a concern at sea, but the principal reason it has is that we're doing this really off-season. We're doing it in the hurricane season. We did have 2 hurricanes coming across the Atlantic, one of which threatened to threaten us but didn't threaten us, and the other one was probably never going to threaten us, but nevertheless it was a very big storm headed up towards the Azores behind us. It actually went off south. But equally, we could have had one of those storm systems come right over the top of us, and that's in a sense, it's a roll of the dice that you make. It's pretty unlikely that it will happen, but nevertheless it's possible that it will happen. You go from a chance of maybe 1 in 10,000 in sailing in the out of hurricane season to perhaps a 1 in 100 chance, and that's quite a big drop in odds. And you clearly don't want to encounter a hurricane at sea. We did encounter bad weather. It's shoulder season. It's not winter yet, but it's getting there. Through the fall, it's into the autumn, and we had some pretty rough weather. I guess it was gale force 8 for some days actually, which is a high proportion of time for any ocean passage. And we were told that we encountered winds. We don't have a wind anometer on here or anything. We were told that we encountered winds of sustained winds of 50 or 60 knots in one of the wind shears that came through, and that's storm force winds. That's force 10. We actually sailed through that, which I have to say gives us great confidence in the boat. So that's one of the blessings of having done this at a dodgy time of year, is moving forward with this boat as we travel further afield and further around the world. We now have a better sense of what she's capable of, and we feel much more confident in what she's capable of. And standing on the back there the one day in one of those gale force conditions, just watching her, still sailing, still had the mainsail up, 3 reefs in the main, a little bit of head sail out, and she's rounding up and coming away and rounding up. She's sailing just like a dinghy. I mean, she's not a dinghy, she's a very big dinghy if she is, a very heavy one, but the dynamics are exactly the same. And quite remarkable to watch this thing actually being steered by a wind vane, not being hand steered at all, just on the wind, pretty much beating, ploughing through this, not throwing a huge amount of water about, not shipping huge big green seas over the deck or anything like that. She's actually a great boat. She's very well designed. She's designed by a Dutch designer called Van der Stad, or Van der Stad. And Van der Stad, they produce Trintellas, they produce a lot of custom design, and they're one of the oldest of the Dutch companies specialising in the construction of steel boats, or design of steel boats, and sometimes the construction, I believe. I think they have a building yard. So, you know, reputable designer. Actually a great boat, really is. Strong, strong, strong. So what about the rest of it? Well, Mr. B, Mr. Bigglesworth, we have discovered probably is not that enamoured of the motion of the ocean. Poor Mr. B. He spent most of the time in the bunk looking and probably feeling very sorry for himself, looking miserable and feeling very sorry for himself. And it may well be that Mr. B is going to be retired from ocean cruising when we get to Europe. I think there's a distinct possibility that he'll be snugged up in some nice onshore home, sitting under a tree, preening himself in the sun under the rose bush in the garden, which is what he used to do in New Zealand. He used to enjoy doing that. So perhaps we've felt that on the balance of things, maybe it's a little bit unkind to have him at sea. If he wasn't seasick, if he wasn't kind of looking miserable most of the time, if he was one of these pussycats that's constantly purring and jumping on your lap, and I know he's a grumpy looking cat anyway because he's a Persian, but I think maybe it's a little bit unkind to keep him on here, but Mr. B may well be retired. How did the crew do? Well, I can tell you that this half of the crew is pretty tired. How did the other half of the crew do, darling? Big cheesy grin.
Yeah.
I think both of us are pretty tired.
I'm actually just, you know, fed up because it was such a rough crossing. And you said the gales lasted days. It felt like weeks as we were going through it. It was really, really tiring. Yeah, it was really tiring. It's the first time that Nikki has done a long passage in rough weather. I've had the benefit of having worked most of my life one way and another with the ocean and with the sea. So I pretty much knew what to expect. It didn't actually make it feel any easier, I have to say. But your first outing into this, it makes you feel a bit punch drunk, and particularly if it goes on longer than you'd anticipated. It becomes a bit of an interminable passage. We're only 4 days behind schedule. It should have been maybe a 13-day passage, and it's turned out to be actually a 17-day passage. So it's only an extra 4 days at sea, but those extra 4 days seem like 4 weeks. And I think at the end of almost all of these ocean passages, you start chart watching. And you kind of go, like this, like this, like this, and you're only doing millimetres. Yeah. You just want it to be over, basically. I think it became an endurance because of the leaks that we had, and everything was damp. It just felt damp and miserable, no sun, no going up on deck for any prolonged period.
It's very different to the 2 previous ocean passages that we've done with this boat, which were from the British Virgin Islands up to Bermuda, and then Bermuda to the Azores. They were very nice, very warm. It's very sunny. We could spend a lot of time on deck. We didn't encounter any significantly bad weather. A little bit of bad weather just short of Bermuda. But so this one, it has been a bit of a grind. So where does that leave you with the romance of the ocean and all of that stuff? Well, after a passage like this, you have to say to yourself, it can be very uncomfortable. It can be. This is the flip side of the ocean cruising coin. There are plenty of days where it's absolutely idyllic. It's beautiful Caribbean or Caribbean beaches. It's lovely marinas. It's beautiful restaurants. It's all the things that you would imagine on the plus side. But of course there is also the downside, the negative side. So there's a couple of recommendations that come out of that. One is get out in some bad weather and make sure that you can be confident in your boat. And if you can do that in coastal cruising, rather than waiting until you're on a long ocean passage before you do that, then you're in a better position, because you'll be very confident in the boat and not actually really worried because you're 1,000 miles offshore and really beyond any help. So get out there in some rough weather with your boat, know what it can do, be confident with it. Make sure you have the correct skills so that you're confident in yourself. I like to feel that my mate is confident in myself, in my ability to sail the boat, not to be reckless, and to take care of any difficulties that we have.
Which you did.
Which I did, thank you very much. Am I getting a thumbs up or a thumbs down? You have to put your thumb in front of the camera. Okay, and it's a thumbs up, that's good news. So the first mate is confident in the skipper. So if you don't have that much experience, get out and do a course. In the UK, do a Royal Yachting Association course, or I'm not sure what the equivalent is in the US, maybe a Coast Guard course or something like that. And get yourself trained up, get yourself experienced before you try these long ocean passages on your own. And the romance of the ocean, well, yeah, I think that this quite difficult passage will have a romantic, rosy tinge to it post-production, after the fact, in hindsight, retrospect, by the fireside telling stories. I think that's where it will appear quite romantic. And do you know, you can't just have idyllic cruising in a cruising lifestyle. You have to embrace the rough with the smooth. It's just the way that it is. So what's next? Well, what's next for us? We're about to arrive in Cherbourg. We did it. Fantastic. And for Nikki, it's her first true transatlantic ocean crossing. So transatlantic crossing in three legs. For myself, it's my third transatlantic crossing. I did one on a crewed yacht with 12 of us on board. I did one alone. And now I've done this one with my beautiful wife and Mr. Bigglesworth, the projectile vomiting cat. So what's next? Well, what's next for us is from Cherbourg to the UK, and we spend the winter in the UK, fixing things, visiting family, and then maybe we're on to Scandinavia next, to where the polar bears live, Spitsbergen. Maybe that's the next place you'll see us. But the question that we have for you, is it your turn next? Are you an armchair sailor? Are you somebody that's just watching this because it's mildly interesting? Trying to figure what the hell is that guy's accent? Or are you going to be the next couple that get offshore and take your sailing yacht on an ocean cruising passage? Maybe you're already there doing it. Bless you. But for those of you that haven't, it's worth doing. It's an embracing experience. It's character building. Cherbourg. Fromage. Red wine.
Croissant.
Croissant. And the French. The French as well. Bless them. Okay. See you in Norway, Spitsbergen, Svalbard, where the polar bears live, maybe. See ya.